Hello and welcome back to the Lloiden Garza Podcast. I'm your host, Lloiden Garza. Thank you for tuning in to our 10th episode. And for those of you that are just tuning in for the first time, welcome. I hope you find our heart-centered messages to be a blessing to you. In our last episode, we talked about how time does not heal all wounds. Although time is an important ingredient, truth, care, and time are very essential ingredients for the healing process. Today, I want to talk a little bit more about the difference of victim and victim mentality. I think there's a lot of confusion and how many people use those words interchangeably and how that creates a lot of confusion within ourselves. So I first want to talk about, victim. A victim is somebody who has been injured, somebody who has been victimized in a sense that something happened against them. And the victim, something that happened in the past. And victim mentality is more of how a person thinks in the present. It's more of a concept that, they are blaming everybody and everything around them or has happened to them is everybody else's fault, not theirs. And so it's really important because I think there is confusion where some doesn't even want to say, hey, I am a victim or I have been victimized because they're in fear that other people are going to look at them as this victim mentality that's blaming everyone and that, that is as a state of, stagnation and in fear of being further victimized. And so I think it's really important that we touch on that today. I know it's a very big topic, but I really want to narrow it down to, how that looks like as far as in the difference of the victim mentality, how it looks like for more of the blame and responsibility. So again, victim, when something was done against a person, it is important to recognize if there was a victim, if they were victimized. And it's important because then you also recognize that something wrong was done. There was an injury. There was an injustice that happened. And the victim, is something that has happened again to them in the past, right? Something happened in the past. And the difference also in that is the word responsibility, is there's a response factor. When someone's looking at someone that's victimized or been victim, is a victim, the question is who's responsible? There is somebody responsible for that. And oftentimes it is not the victim that is responsible. But it's important to understand who is responsible for those actions. Where victim mentality, that's a state of more of blaming everybody, putting blame into other people. In the current, they're still blaming everybody else going on and don't ever take that responsibility. And that's that big difference of victim and victim mentality, is that responsibility and also that way of thinking. And so, with that way of thinking, when you're looking at blaming others, it's a very disempowering, where responsibility is a very empowering and allows you to do something. Response itself is an action word. That root word, responsibility, it's an action word. It's a response. It is to propel. It is to do something. To do something. It's moving, future oriented. Although victim is happened in the past, responsibility is empowering and moving forward and responding to something. And so I think that that's very important to make that distinction, where victim mentality is, although it's in the present way of thinking, it is very stagnant in response, meaning that if it's always blaming somebody, you have no power. There is no power. It's disempowering. And it also makes a person feel stuck because they don't have power to do anything. Where a victim, yes, it's true. It's important to recognize when you are the victim, because it's important to recognize truth and responsibility. If something had happened to you, you got hurt, you got injured, what's the truth behind that? Who was responsible? And then, although you can't change the past, you also have a responsibility for yourself to get the healing. And so the responsibility of who injured you, but in that process, you have a responsibility to get the care for yourself. And so I really think that that is really very important to mention because, things like how blame, when you think about blame, it's like a process of discounting yourself, your power, your ability to choose. And it leads to more of a stagnant life. And so many people feel stuck. Maybe that's a signal to be able to look into that area and see what's causing you to feel that way. And I think it's really important to know and see that huge difference. So there's that huge difference of whose fault it is and whose responsibility. And I think that responsibility breeds accountability. And that's really important to know is the accountability where you see something more clear. And although you can't change that, and although somebody was responsible for your pain and your injury, now you have a wound. Now, that responsibility of getting that care for your wound is your responsibility. And so it's really important because if you are always thinking, you don't want to look like the victim because you don't want to be taught or you don't want other people to think you have a victim mentality, then how do you get that care? You have an injury that you are avoiding or you're running from and hiding from, and it's still there. And what happens with injury is that it can cause infections to other parts. And we talked about that in our last episode. And so it's really important to recognize that. Things I wrote down and wrote as far as in some differences that you could see when, blame and responsibility, with blame, it's not empowering, where responsibility it is. Blame is more of a critical voice, and responsibility is more of that compassionate voice towards yourself. Blame has to do with more fear and shame and guilt, where responsibility has more healing and growth and learning. And it's so important to recognize that blame, you feel stuck. And responsibility, there's that moving forward. And whether that are baby steps, it's moving forward in that process. And so, understanding that and seeing that, I think, is very important because the ability to see that and also apply that in our lives is important because you have to think, it's like if no one's responsible for your pain and everyone, or you're not responsible, they're not responsible, but it's just blaming everything, then how do you move? How do you heal? And I think that confusion creates chaos. There is so much information out there that causes a lot of confusion. They're very polarized views. And so you hear, don't be a victim mentality, you're not a victim. Well, if you got injured, you are a victim. If there's an offense against you, there was an injustice. How do you restore yourself? How do you relieve? How do you get relief for that injury and pain? How do you restore yourself to wholeness if you don't even face that truth? So again, like I mentioned, this is a very big topic, but I just wanted to touch on that because I think it's important to recognize that difference, that there is a difference between victim and victim mentality. One has to do with the past, one has to do with the present and way of thinking. One is more empowering and one is more disempowering. One is moving forward, one is being stuck. So I just wanted to just touch on that, and explore that a little bit more, or explore that And I want to continue to explore different things with you as well. So I hope that you enjoyed our episode today, and I appreciate you tuning in. And I want to continue these heart centered messages and wishing you an amazing week. Thank you.